2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to episode 12 of the PuckPedia Hockey Show. Today we welcome on Drew Shore, former NHL player turned player agent. Drew has an interesting background, so we dive into what it was like to play in both the National Hockey League, and he also played a lot of American Hockey League games. So we talk about how that league was both on him as a player and also just some of the challenges that come with the American Hockey League. Then he transitioned over to the agency side of things once his playing career ended. So we talk about what it was like. He started out at Wasserman, which represents players of the likes like Connor McDavid. So we talk about the resources he had there, what it was like negotiating contracts and switching from the player side of thing to the agency side of thing. Then we wrap up now. Drew kind of focuses more on his entrepreneurial side of things. He has a Betting the Limit podcast, and he also created this company called Amalfi, which is a community of former top-tier athletes, executives, CEOs, and building that network and just talking through different ideas and navigating different career paths. So Drew is a great person to have on the show. Very excited for you guys to take a listen to this episode. And without further ado, let's drop the puck. We now welcome on a very special guest to the PuckPedia Hockey Show. It's Drew Shore, former NHL player, now turned agent and entrepreneur. Drew, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on.
No, thanks for coming on. Especially with this kind of show, on PuckPedia side of things, I think it's interesting to get someone who's both played in the NHL, but then got to see the other side of it on the agency side of things. And so I think we're gonna have a great conversation. I think you're gonna be able to give our listeners a lot of good insights, both on how you manage navigating contracts on the player, but then when you're negotiating them as an agent.
Yeah, super excited to do it. And obviously, like you said, I have a lot of experience. I also had 3 brothers that all played hockey at a pretty high level. So I'm very familiar with the business side of it and happy to get into it.
Exactly. Well, let's start off, I guess, before you got to the NHL. Like, what was kind of your path in terms of, like you mentioned, you had some brothers who also played on the pro side. And so I imagine that kind of helped your, passion for hockey. But how did you kind of get into the sport? And then how did you navigate your career through juniors and up to, getting drafted in the NHL?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I had 2, I call them the perfect hockey parents, because I had 2 extremely athletic parents. My mom was a pro tennis player and my dad played lacrosse and soccer. So both of them were very athletic, but they had 0 hockey background. I don't think my mom, growing up in Florida, even knew how to skate. And my dad did a little bit just growing up in Denver, but had never really played hockey at all. So right when the Avalanche moved to Colorado and started having a lot of success right away, I think they won their first cup in 1995. That was kind of what we always had sports on our television, and I just fell in love with it. And then, like you said, I was lucky enough to have 3 younger brothers that were all able to play as well. And it was a blast growing up just because, there was always someone to shoot pucks with or play roller hockey in the driveway, and it was a lot of fun.
Was it always hockey for you? Were there other sports you kind of played growing up? And how difficult is it to navigate? I know hockey is one of the more expensive sports to play as a kid, and some of the other sports are easier to kind of get into.
Yeah, well, I was lucky being the oldest of 4 boys, so I always got the new equipment, and then it got passed down to my other brothers. But yeah, I always knew from literally the time I was 3 or 4 years old that I wanted to be a hockey player. I played a ton of different sports. I'm a sports geek, kind of through and through. So, I played basketball, football, baseball, lacrosse, played everything pretty much until I decided to move to Vancouver when I was 13 years old. And that's kind of when I decided to focus on hockey. But growing up, we played a lot of everything.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So moving over to Canada, kind of when you were younger, 13 years old, it's kind of crazy age to just kind of pack it up and move. So I imagine that decision was based primarily because of where you were kind of in your hockey journey, or were there other reasons why you guys moved to Vancouver?
No, so I ended up moving by myself and lived with another family. There was another family from Denver that had moved up there a couple years prior, and that's who I lived with. But growing up here, there was not a lot of high-level hockey. There was no AAA. There wasn't a lot of ice time. Programs were really expensive because you had to travel and drive hours every day just to get on the ice. And it's crazy to see how much hockey's grown now. Now there's so many AAA programs. There's ice available everywhere. There's training facilities everywhere. So it's crazy. There's kids from Arizona, Texas, who are now moving here to play hockey. So it's been fun to kind of watch hockey come full circle in Denver and Colorado in general. And I mean, I think a lot of that goes to how successful the Avs and maybe the University of Denver and some of the other programs have been.
Yeah, Denver powerhouse in the NCAA, led by Coach Carl over there, winning a couple national championships. You got the Avalanche, like you mentioned, won their first cup, I think, in 1996. Won another cup a few years back. They have a wagon of a team with Cale Makar and Nathan McKinnon. So Colorado and Denver hockey is definitely on the rise. Let's kind of navigate to when you were getting close, like when you were in your junior career and then getting close to being draft eligible. Like, how did that all situation play out? Did you kind of know where you were going to be drafted kind of leading into the draft, or was it kind of more of a crapshoot?
I actually was supposed to be a first round pick and ended up sliding to the second round. So my draft was in Montreal. It was a great experience, aside from a little bit of disappointment on the first night. But my parents were able to be there. My brothers came, and overall, it was an awesome experience. And I was drafted by Florida at the time. And my first couple of years there, we weren't very good and had a lot of high draft picks. And I've told this story recently on some other pods, but I was in the locker room when Vinnie Viola bought the team and came in and said he bought the team and was going to turn it into a winner. And I'm sure every owner who buys a team goes in and gives a similar speech, and you never know what's going to happen, but everything he said and he's delivered on. And it's been amazing to watch just what he's been able to turn that place into over the last 10 years.
Yeah, the Panthers are obviously a wagon, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. To your point, I bet a lot of owners do say that, but then you'll see owners on the flip side, like I think the Carolina Panthers owner, Tepper, came in like, 7, 8 years ago to say he was going to change it out and they were going to win. And I think they've won like a handful of games since then, like very, like 300 or 30% winning percentage. So it doesn't always work out for the benefit of the players, but in this case, it did. For your like NHL career, like you ended up, I think, playing 98 games, getting 26 points in the show, bouncing around between a few teams. Also, too, like for your first kind of entry level contract, like what was that like? Going through the process of getting an agent and then kind of negotiating. Those deals don't have much negotiation, I feel, in terms of the base salary, but you can negotiate the bonuses a little bit.
Yeah, I think looking back, I could have actually stayed and played my senior year at the University of Denver. And played actually. So I got to play with my brother Nick there. He played with my brother Quentin there. But if I would have stayed my senior year, Nick and Quentin would have been on the team. And that would have been so cool for my parents and a lot of our friends. And for people who don't know, if you end up staying for 4 years at college, you then can become a free agent. And my first year pro was a little bit weird because that was the lockout in 2012. But the positive of that was the American League was probably the best it's ever been and probably will ever be. I mean, I think we played Oklahoma City 16 times that year, and I think they were Edmonton's farm team. And so they had Taylor Hall, Nugent Hopkins, Jordan Everly, Justin Schultz. So the American League was incredible that year, which was awesome for me, just kind of making that transition and jump from college. But I definitely, looking back, would have probably stayed one more year and played with both my brothers.
Yeah, I mean, you can't look back now, but like, could you guys have been, the Hughes brothers, right? That's all the talk of the town is like, is Quinn going to go over to New Jersey and play with his two brothers? And so I think it is a unique situation when you're kind of able to play with your entire family. But like you said, you had some decisions to make. Pro was calling, the money was calling, and I think sometimes you have to make those business decisions. Unfortunately, looking back to like, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it'll be interesting to see with NIL, like if any of that changes, right? Like that was one of the huge deciding factors for me to leave is I wanted to start making money and get paid to play hockey and become a professional. Now, had I been at a big school that offered me similar money to the American League, or for some of these kids, a lot more money, I think that maybe would have enticed me to stay one more season. And so it'll be interesting to see now with all the new rules, kind of how that landscape changes.
Yeah, the dynamic is interesting this year, right? Because you have guys like Gavin McKenna and Porter Martone who are making significant amount of money through NIL to be at those schools at Penn State and Michigan State. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's probably less money to go around in hockey than there is for other major sports in college. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I think like the dynamic of how powerful the CHL is going to be is also something to keep eyes on this year because there are people that are concerned that like the leagues like the OHL and the WHL won't be as strong as traditional because of all this NCAA money. But we'll have to see how it all plays out. And just like, I think development is kind of the key there.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I mean, obviously, you're going to be losing players like Gavin McKenna, but on the flip side of that, every top American player age 16 and 17 will probably now be going there. So I actually think it's probably going to make the league better, but definitely younger. So, I mean, that was a huge decision for me and some of my brothers to make when we were that age. And definitely looking back, like we would have all gone and played in the Western Hockey League if we would have been able to then go on and play NCAA.
Do you think you were at a point when you were kind of making your pro decisions that you were getting that information and that knowledge to help, guide your brothers to make those similar decisions? Or like would you have told like gave them different advice now looking back on things?
Yeah, I mean, every year you kind of learn new things, and I definitely think I helped them a lot along the way. I mean, I'm super proud of my brother Nick had the best career out of all of us. He played over 300 games, played a lot of that in LA. My brother Quentin was drafted by Ottawa in the fourth round. Actually got one major hip surgery in college, and the other one done his freshman year or his first year pro, and then kind of didn't play very long. Can still barely walk. And then my youngest brother, we forced to go to Harvard, and he was the captain at Harvard of their hockey team, and is now working on in New York. So that was pretty incredible for him. So no, I mean, I think that like I like to think I helped them along the way. They definitely probably learned from some of the mistakes that I made. And we're all of us are best friends, and it's one of the best things in my life today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's dial it back into like your career. So like you mentioned, you started in Florida, then you bounced over to Calgary and Vancouver on the pro side. Played a bunch of AHL games in addition to some NHL games, and then you had a pretty big gap in the NHL side of things from Vancouver to then Carolina during that COVID year and being on the taxi squad. I guess like my question would be, what was it like kind of during that COVID year and like being on that taxi squad and playing like in the bubble and things like that?
It was horrible, and it was a disaster of a last year of hockey for me. I spent a couple years in Zurich, Switzerland, which was amazing. We won a championship there. My oldest daughter was born in Zurich. Should have stayed in Switzerland my whole career, but ended up going to Russia. And then when I was in Russia, I had a really good experience, but I spent a lot of time away from my wife, and my first daughter was very young. And then once we decided we were going to have more kids, my wife was pregnant with our second one and decided just I was going to sign any contract in North America just so we could all be together, thinking the season was going to start in September, October like it normally does. But then it actually ended up getting pushed all the way till January that year, and she was too pregnant to fly. So I ended up pretty much living on my own again for that season in Carolina. But it was super weird. And I mean, so many things that make the game of hockey so fun, the camaraderie, the dinners on the road, playing in front of fans weren't there that year. So it was a super weird year and kind of, I mean, I think it probably forced me to retire a little bit earlier than I would have.
Yeah, and I guess like the if you could have like done it differently, like I guess like my question is what would you have done different? Like would you try to play more overseas in like Switzerland and like on the Europe side of things, or would you kind of have approached it differently in the North American side?
I definitely think the biggest mistake I made was just going to Europe too early. I mean, I think in my first 3 years pro, I was sent from the NHL to the AHL like over 50 times. I mean, there were some seasons where I pretty much just lived in a hotel the whole year and bounced up and down. And I just probably made a rash decision that I was over that. And looking back, like giving up on becoming a full-time NHLer at the age of 25 is something that I would have done differently. But with that being said, I got to live in one of the most beautiful places in the world and make pretty good money playing hockey, and definitely got a ton of different experiences from that as well.
Yeah, I could also see though how that could be taxing on someone if you're not really in a stable situation and you're just bouncing from hotel to hotel. And some of the AHL trips, right? They say it's like the always hungry league, and it's tough to like some of those bus trips are really long. And so I think like you don't see the player side of it when you're not involved personally. And so I think that it probably made it tough, especially when you're that young. You're like 23, 24. You see some other people starting their careers and going on like glamorous work trips or things like that, and you're battling in like Rochester on a Tuesday night or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are listening to this who don't really understand, I don't think many people understand how hard of a hockey league the American Hockey League is. Like, yes, it's a little bit slower than the NHL, and there's some players, but I mean, if you put the best players in the American Hockey League, they would clearly dominate. But there's a lot of everyday NHLers that wouldn't necessarily rip up the American Hockey League. And like you said, there's so many tough bus trips. You're in the middle of nowhere. You're playing in front of no fans on a Sunday afternoon in Wilkes-Barre or Belleville or somewhere like that, and getting paid probably 10% of what you'd be making if you were playing in the NHL. So there's a lot of mental things that are very hard that come with playing in that league. And looking back, though, I was very immature at that age, like I think a lot of kids are. And I think that there are definitely a lot of decisions I would have made differently.
Yeah, but It all seemed to work out for you kind of post-career, and it seems like you kind of were able to learn from your decisions. So once you kind of wrapped up like your NHL and your playing days, both in the NHL and then overseas in Europe, you decided that you kind of wanted to go the agency route and ended up joining Wasserman. Can you walk us through like what kind of went through your mind? Like, why did you want to kind of go in the agency route? Was it always you wanted to stay in hockey in some capacity and agency was definitely the way to go? Or were there other kind of options and things you were thinking out and that's just kind of where you landed?
Well, there were a ton of different options when I retired. I've always loved hockey and still to this day would love to eventually become a general manager or president of an organization. I think that that's where I'll be best kind of fitted long term in my life and my career. And it's funny, I was represented by CAA when I was 12 or 13, or probably 13 or 14 years old. And there was a guy there who basically did a ton of work for them, but was literally picking when guys would fly into LA, he'd come pick you up in a van and would grab your stuff. And that guy eventually went on to start the hockey division at Wasserman and now represents some of the best players in the world, Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews. So I actually called him. Someone wrote a really cool article on him and I hadn't talked to him in a long time and just called him to really tell him congrats and kind of say I was proud of him because I saw where he started in the business 15 or 20 years ago. And we started talking. I started looking at some stuff on the team side and ultimately thought learning from him would be awesome. And at the time, Wasserman had Jeff Jackson, who's now the president of the Edmonton Oilers, Judd, obviously, who's still there running the hockey department, as well as a ton of other agents like Pete Rutilli and some of these guys who have been in the business for a long time. So I thought for me, starting in the business, it'd be a great place to learn. And it was awesome. And that was a little bit, COVID hurt that a little bit just because when I joined, it was right during COVID. So there wasn't a ton of kind of in-person connection and stuff going on like that there. But I think I got to learn from some of the smartest people in hockey. And there's a lot of things that I do day to day and just the way I see the game, contracts, negotiations that I learned from all those guys there. So super grateful for that experience.
Yeah, well, how long did you last there? And then what were kind of some of the things you were kind of focused on a day to day? Like, were you just kind of playing like a Swiss Army knife, like just learning kind of as much as you could, or did you have like specific like area of expertise?
Yeah, so I was there for 3 years and started building up my own kind of client list. But I think the stuff that I learned the most there was from some of the clients that were already in-house there, some of the best players in the NHL, and just seeing how they thought about their contracts, marketing, endorsements. And it kind of got me a front row seat to like how the game operates at the highest level from the eyes of some of those players. And that is what I really enjoyed about working there, just because they have so many amazing players who, I mean, some of those guys are really changing. I mean, you look at Austin Matthews and being the captain in Toronto, being able to put the puck in the net like he does, but also just seeing kind of what he's been able to build up off the ice has been pretty special and something not a lot of hockey guys have done before.
Yeah, why do you think it is that like hockey kind of lags behind their personal branding in terms of how they're marketing themselves off the ice? If you look at some of the superstars of the other major leagues in the NFL, NBA, MLB, like they have like brand name players like a LeBron, like a Shohei Ohtani, like a Steph Curry, they're able to market themselves better, I think, than NHL players are. Like, and if you just look at their social media pages, like a lot of the NHL players are not posting as frequently as some of these other superstars. Like, what do you attribute that to anything like a hockey culture? Like, what are your kind of thoughts just being on that side of it and kind of navigating that?
Yeah, certainly. I think when I was coming into the league, there weren't a lot of guys who had any interest in building up their social media or platform. And I think a lot of guys didn't realize how many opportunities they were passing up by not doing that. And I think if you look at sports in general, I mean, my wife hates golf, for example, but when Netflix launched those Full Swing documentaries and you got to see the players and their families and what they go through and their kids, now she is a fan of some different golfers just because he knows their story. And for so long, hockey has lacked that. And so many players had been kind of afraid to step out and show who they truly are. And I think that has kind of created a lag because at the end of the day, the product on the ice is great for people who love hockey, but your everyday sports fan, like they associate and they connect with you as an individual. So if people aren't willing to show that side, people kind of turn away and have so many other people to root for. And I think that's slowly changing. I think some of the young stars in the NHL are really starting to step out. And I think that it's funny because like, I feel like when guys start showing their personality sometimes, certainly some can take it a little bit overboard, but they start to get killed by it. But I mean, I think it's great. Like, you look at the Florida Panthers celebrations last year, right? Like certainly they might have taken a few things overboard, but regardless, they were having a great time. They deserved a win. And them celebrating ended up on the front page of ESPN and at every fan in the world, hockey or non-hockey, talking about it. So I think that getting some of these young stars to show what they like to do, who they are as people, and more than just like the standard. I mean, you look at the standard hockey interview, it's right. It's like, we played hard tonight. The goalie played great. Like
We got the pucks deep.
Yeah, we got pucks deep. We didn't turn over the puck. But like, I mean, you look at the NBA. The NBA is like a reality show mixed in with some basketball. I mean, between guys demanding to get traded and all that stuff. So I think the culture's starting to shift, and I love that because it's going to help the game grow. It's going to help attract more fans, and ultimately it's going to get players a lot more money.
Yeah, I think the Amazon series definitely helps with that side of it, right? Like you mentioned, the Netflix Full Swing. Like I think the Amazon face-off going behind the scenes with some of these players is kind of introducing that personal side. And then also you're getting the relaxed dress code. So you're getting to see some of these players' style choices. And I think that helps showcase their personality a little bit. You're starting to see slowly more of these players use their social media to do these endorsement and these advertisement deals and kind of put themselves out there. And I think that's a good thing. You looked at the Tkachuk last year during the Four Nations too. They were hitting every single late night show. They were on the Kelsey's New Heights show. So I think the more opportunities that players have to do that, I think is only beneficial for the game of the NHL.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Like the Amazon one is awesome. Like back in the day, I forget who did it, but used to do like the lead up to the Winter Classic. And as a hockey fan, as a young kid, like I loved watching that because you got to see a little bit more than what was going on in the ice. And I think that the more of that stuff that people continue to do is only going to help grow the game, but it also ultimately comes down to the players' willingness to just step outside of their comfort zone. And it seems like a lot of the stars, the younger stars, are starting to do that.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, right, where you said the NBA is kind of like a reality TV show. Like I think the NHL could take some of that to make their own sort of reality TV show. I think we were disappointed a little bit in the last couple of weeks. A lot of these big name pending unrestricted free agents just signed massive contracts when on the flip side, July 1, 2026 could have been a really big day for the NHL. You could have seen a lot of superstars possibly changing teams. And now we have Kirill Kaprizov locked in. We have Connor McDavid locked in. We have Jack Eichel locked in. We have Kyle Connor locked in. So a lot of these big name free agents that were going to be on the market are now no longer on the market. Being like a fan of the NHL now and kind of what are your observations both on like the contract side of things, but just like the game in general over the last, let's call it like 6 to 12 months?
The actual game of hockey is in the best place it's ever been. I mean, the talent level of some of these young kids, like your average 18-year-old NHLer in today's game that started last week compared to what it was when I started in 2011, like the skill level is just ridiculous. You know what I mean? And their ability to make plays and the actual on-ice product from an entertainment perspective is better than it's ever been. And like you said, I think that, I mean, the new CBA is coming up, but like free agency in basketball is a huge day. You know what I mean? Because players are often trading teams. In hockey, there hasn't been a ton of even GMs who are willing to like leverage offer sheets, right? Like when a team submits an offer sheet for another player, I think personally it's great, but there's almost been like this unwritten rule that it hasn't happened. I mean, I don't know how many times it's happened over the last 25 years in hockey, but it's like
Handful,
you almost
right?
need some. But it's also, if you look at it, the game has kind of been run by the same group of people, more or less, for the last 20 years. So it's almost like we need some fresh blood in there who are willing to do stuff like that to kind of ignite more movement within the league, try and improve their rosters, and ultimately create some entertainment.
Yeah, that's why you look at what happened last year, right? And someone, like you mentioned, a new infusion, like an Eric Tulsky of the Carolina Hurricanes, for example. He was willing to take a big swing and go for Mikko Rantanen last year, trading pieces like Marty Necas and Jack Drury in return. And then when he couldn't get a deal done, he then flipped Mikko Rantanen to the Dallas Stars. You typically don't see someone moving, a superstar of that magnitude, moving twice in one season. So I thought that brought a big entertainment value. And, you know, it was something that was different on the NHL side of thing. And then even the year before when the St. Louis Blues threw a couple offer sheets to the young Edmonton players, Broberg and Holloway, you were like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. But there's got to be more of that. And I think that brings a lot of entertainment value. It brings a lot of talking points to the NHL. And then to your point, like it's then on ESPN, they're talking about it nonstop. And that's only good for the league.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, as a player, you don't want to see guys get moved, right? Because you know how disruptive it can be on them personally and for their families and stuff. But at the end of the day, that's what creates storylines. And I think that the NHL now, I mean, you can make different arguments, but there's only so many teams that have a realistic chance to win the Stanley Cup. Now, you can debate on what that number is. Some might say it's 6, some might say it's 12. And I think one of the best things about hockey is just how competitive the league is in general. And so I think when you look at that, there's a lot of teams who are going to be out of the playoffs. So I think that, like, how can they upgrade their future? And by doing that, give a contender a better chance to win. Like, it always astonishes me. Like, I think if you look at draft picks, for example, like, so many teams are so hesitant to move draft picks. But I mean, you probably know the stats better than me. Like, a second or third round draft pick has like a 25% chance of playing 100 games. So, I mean, if I was running a team and you have a legit chance to win the cup and it's a matter of a second or a third round draft pick that's going to upgrade your roster and give you a legitimate chance, I don't know why more teams aren't firing those off.
Or you'll also see a situation where the organization has a bunch of prospects that are quote unquote untouchable. And then you see how these prospects develop in 2, 3, 4 years. And you look back on it and you're like, that prospect was untouchable. Like, you could have made a way better move at that point. You never know how these prospects are going to develop. And you're focused a lot on the potential of what they could be as opposed to the reality of what they're probably going to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I put prospects kind of in that second or third round draft pick bucket. You know what I mean? As like you said, if you have a guy who you don't even know is going to be a for sure NHLer, but he can actually upgrade your roster today. And I mean, everyone talks about him, but you got to look at like what Bill Zito's done in Florida. He's a guy who is clearly not afraid to swing big. And I mean, look at the guys he brought in last year with Seth Jones, Brad Marchand. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of people right now too, but like, it amazes me how many teams who think they're contenders go through that trade deadline and don't significantly upgrade certain aspects of their lineup. Because like you said, a lot of these teams do have, whether it's draft picks or younger prospects, movable assets. And I mean, I think what makes hockey great is it's the hardest trophy probably in the world to win, just with how competitive the league is and how hard the playoffs are. So I think you got to be doing everything you can to give yourself the best chance.
Yeah, and a lot of hockey too, right? The issue, I guess, is that some teams think that it's like you're going to have the right team to build, but there are a lot of luck factors that play into winning an individual game. So I think some teams are scared to really go for it when they don't think that they're far and away the best team, and I think that kind of hurts both the entertainment factor, but also like the fan base and the vibes that we didn't go for it this year when we could have, and we had the assets to move.
Yeah, like you said, it's so hard to win because the game comes down to maybe a post here, or, you know what I mean? The puck takes a bad bounce here. And I think that's why if you look at these teams who have remained competitive, what Tampa Bay did, what Florida did now, I mean, even in the West, Edmonton, Colorado, Dallas, like, it's pretty remarkable how some of these teams have been in the hunt every year for the last 5 or 10 years. And it comes down to a break or two, and you need a luck too, even with injuries too, right? If you look at over the last couple of years, like during the playoffs, there have been some huge injuries that have really hurt teams, and that's something you can't really control, but you got to have, like, Florida's always had guys who are ready to step in when it seems like someone else goes down.
Yeah, and like you mentioned to the Western Conference, right? Two of these 4 teams are not going to be in the Western Conference final, right? Between Colorado, Dallas, Vegas, and Edmonton. They're going to be probably a first or second round exit in the playoffs. And that just shows you how difficult it is to win in this league, because all 4 of those teams on any given night could go on a run, and you can easily make the case that any of them could win the Stanley Cup this year.
Yeah, and I also think from an entertainment perspective, we have to go back to the old playoff format. You know what I mean? Like,
One
I
versus
think
eight.
that you 1 versus 8, because the Colorado Avalanche and the Dallas Stars should not have been, like, that could have been a Western Conference final last year, and they played each other in the first round. And then, I mean, I'm tired of watching Edmonton and LA play for the 19th time in a row, or whatever. I think it's the 6th, or it could be the 6th
I think it's
if they play
5.
this
I
year.
think Edmonton's
Yeah.
won 4 straight.
Yeah, so it's like, you know what I mean? We need some new matchups. So I definitely am a proponent of going back to the old format, just because I think from an entertainment perspective, like we keep talking about, that'll change things up. But yeah, it's interesting to see. And I mean, that's what makes hockey great, is just how competitive it is across the league. Because I think if you look at the other sports, there's probably, if you want to say there's 10 to 12 teams who can win in hockey, there's maybe 4 or 5 in probably those other leagues.
Exactly. Like the NFL, NBA, like you're not going to be 6, 7, 8 deep on a team that you think could win the championship. It's going to be, a couple in each conference, and that's about it. So then after Wasserman, let's get back to your career a little bit. So after Wasserman, you kind of split off and went on your own, and now you represent one current NHL player, a bunch of players in the AHL, some players overseas. What kind of went into that decision to kind of branch off and handle it on your own? And how difficult has that been, or how rewarding, I should say, too?
It's been a little bit of both. At Wasserman, you have a ton of back office support and support all the time, and that's a little bit different when you go on your own. I feel very grateful that I have a lot of great relationships there. So if I am negotiating a contract, I have a lot of friends in the business who are still agents who you can kind of bounce ideas off of. But I mean, ultimately, I just felt like I wanted to spend a little bit more of my time on some of the business stuff that I was doing outside of hockey. And I think that this presented me with a great opportunity. And I'm fortunate that some of my clients who were my friends were able to come with me and still love helping them out. And I think one of the ideas that I originally wanted to be an agent for was just helping guys make better decisions than I did at certain points in my career. But the whole agency business has come down, especially with NIL, and to just a lot of recruiting young kids. And I really do not like that part at all of the business. I mean, I don't really have any interest in sitting down with a 13-year-old kid and lying to him and telling him that he's the next Sidney Crosby, when the truth is, if you're really good at 13 and you continue to develop every year at the same rate, you're going to give yourself a chance to play. But that's not the sales pitch that a lot of 13-year-old parents of 13-year-olds really like. So I don't really like the recruiting part of the business, but love all the contract negotiations and helping the players I currently work with. And it's been fun, and being on my own has definitely been harder in some things. Some things have been easier, but like I said, I'm grateful that I have a lot of support from people still in the industry that I can bounce ideas off of.
And then talk to me about the contract negotiation part of the thing. Like behind the scenes, like the audience, the people listening, like they aren't privy to all this information, I guess. What are some of the like nuances maybe, or something that surprised you when you were kind of going through your first couple negotiations on the agency side of things that are really kind of sticking points in some of these? Like a lot of people understand the general terms of the years and the average annual value and the cap hit, but maybe some of these other like bonuses or like trade protections, or like what are some things that maybe surprised you a little bit when you're kind of going through these negotiations?
Well, there's been a ton of emphasis over the last couple of years on some of the bigger deals on just front loading them and getting the players for as much signing bonus money as they can. And for people who have no idea what I'm talking about, if a player is making $12 million a year for, call it X amount of years, but they can get the majority of that money up front, there's a huge value add to the player, whether you want to look at the time value of money. If that money is invested over the 8 years, there's a ton of things that from the team side, they could be owed less money towards the end of their career, like towards the end of their contract. So maybe it's more movable. If a signing bonus has already been paid out, then the team's only on the hook for the remaining salary during the season. So there's a ton of benefits that go both ways. But I think the biggest value add for the agent is just understanding where that player is in his career and what he wants from his career. And it's super easy as a fan to play Monday morning quarterback on some of these deals, especially whether it's either on the agent side or the team side, right? But I mean, there's a lot of guys, some guys have no interest in playing on a 1-year deal. Some guys are perfectly fine with it. Some guys they might have a wife who's from Canada and she wants to stay in Canada, or a ton of family in California and they want to be in California. So I think the biggest thing that the best agents do is just understanding where that player is. And to simplify this as much as I can is, if a player's coming off his entry-level deal and say scores 25 goals, well, you and that player have to realistically sit down together and understand, did you have a great year and you might be a 20 to 25 goal scorer for the next 10 years? Or did you score 15 goals, then 20 goals, then 25, and you're trending at a level where you might score 40 or 45? So I think that's a huge thing that not enough people talk about, is just kind of sitting back with an unbiased opinion and evaluating where that player is and where he ultimately fits in the league. Because at the end of the day, there might be a player who had the best year of his career and might want to sign a 7 or 8 year deal. But there might be a player who is just scratching the surface, who maybe didn't play a lot on the first power play, who still scored 25 goals, who's destined to be a 40 or 45 goal scorer. So I think making those decisions in line with your player is super important. And I think if you look at the team side, more and more teams want to lock guys in for as long as they can with the lowest kind of AAV that they can. So a lot of these teams are making a ton of bets right now. You see, especially on young players, where for like the last 10 years, it was like, get the superstar on the 6x6 or the 8x8 contract, which has now moved up to maybe 9x9 or whatever you want to call it. But with the cap going up, if you can get a superstar player locked in at a very reasonable number, it sets you up to be successful and be competitive for a long time. And I think, I mean, you look at some of the contracts like the Florida Panthers, because I keep bringing them up because they're pretty much the same to the NHL. But I mean, they have Gustav Forsling, one of the best D-men in the NHL, locked up for the next 6 or 7 years. That I think he's at $5.75 million. And contracts like that enable you to be competitive and spend money elsewhere. And I think that from the team side of things, the more guys, the more elite level players you're able to get at good numbers, obviously just makes you more competitive.
Yeah, and I think another team that comes to mind right away is the Montreal Canadiens. And you look at the piece of business they did this morning with Lane Hudson, getting him locked down for the next 8 years, starting next season at under $9 million AAV, when a couple of other superstar defensemen like Jackson Lacombe and Luke Hughes also signed for about $9 million. And they have some of their core locked up for a long period of time, like Suzuki, Caulfield, Slavkovsky. So I think like a team like the Montreal Canadiens might be that next wave of locking down your superstar players early in their contracts and getting a lot of term when the salary cap is about to explode, and really being able to add around the margins. And then to your point too, like the Florida Panthers are the gold standard now. The Tampa Bay Lightning were the gold standard, and still have a really great core there of doing similar things. So I think a lot of these teams are now kind of looking at locking in their superstars longer term. And I think that is helping the teams build for the salary cap jump, but maybe from the fan and the entertainment side, it's not as exciting.
Yeah, and I think a controversial opinion that I have that a lot of people could disagree with is I think a lot of these teams don't get in trouble by overpaying their top players, if that makes any sense. I think a lot of teams, if you look at the teams who are really in cap trouble or in bad spots in certain situations, it's because they're overpaying like the middle to lower end of their lineup more than it should be, if that makes any sense. So I think that like paying your third or fourth D-man $8 or $9 million is probably the mistake. Whether your top D-man makes 11 or 12, I don't think it's quite as significant, but I think that everyone loves to talk about the big contracts just because, I mean, they're the most money and they get the most media attention. But I think the biggest mistakes that a lot of GMs make, if you look at some of these rosters, is just maybe overpaying depth guys that could be replaced by guys who have a very similar capability and role for a lot less, or I mean, cheaper.
I was looking at some of the stuff you're doing on the entrepreneur side of things. So aside from hockey, you also like have just this entrepreneurial mindset. You started this company called Amalfi, where you basically are recruiting some top tier athletes, some CEOs, some executives, getting them together and building like a community. So maybe explain a little bit of what that's been like, outside of the game of hockey, but still kind of adjacent to that like top tier athlete aspect.
Yeah, so I always thought, like you said, when I was bouncing around from team to team, that whenever I retired and I had my own schedule and my own flexibility, I was going to be the happiest I've ever been in my life. And the complete opposite was true. I was an absolute disaster for probably 2 to 3 years. And I think I personally thought that that was unique to me because I didn't have the hockey career that I always envisioned I was going to have. And so I felt like I failed at the one thing I set out my whole life to do. And through my podcast, actually, like, I learned that whether you played in the NBA and made $300 million and played for 20 years, or you played Division III football at Dartmouth, that transition from retirement of sport is very difficult for everybody. And now certain guys struggle with it for 5 years, but there's actually a hockey player who played for 20 years, won a couple Olympic gold medals, who told me, I'll never forget where I was, that he really struggled for 10 years after retirement. So I was just decided there's way too much of this going on and we needed to do something about it. And that's why I built Amalfi, to help guys kind of figure out their next transition into the business world, whatever that is. And a lot of people ask what I think they can do. And I don't think it matters what you do, whether you want to be a coach, whether you want to work in real estate, finance, something. But I think you got to find something that you can kind of channel that energy and passion every day too, because I don't think you're going to be happy, or at least most athletes aren't going to be happy just sitting around taking care of kind of their house and mundane things every day. I think you need to challenge yourself. And that's why we built Amalfi. And we've been able to help a ton of guys, whether it's get new jobs, whether it's get investment checks from people who have been in the industry for 20 years. And it's been awesome to see where it goes. And I think sitting at that kind of combination of sports and business has allowed us to be super successful.
Yeah, it's awesome, and I think I've just even seen it on like LinkedIn. I think the most recent NHL player I could think of is like Tyler Johnson, just kind of transitioning to either like insurance or finance in that aspect. You have someone in the NFL like Justin Tuck, who's now a managing director of Goldman Sachs. So I think those high end, top tier athletes really want to channel that competitive energy, and I think what you're building over there with Amalfi is great to like have that sense of community, but also that guidance and that sounding board if there's any like thoughts or opinions or stuff that you can kind of navigate just from your experience and everyone else in that community.
Yeah, I mean, I was joking with one of my friends, like most people when they're 18 years old start networking. I had never really tried networking until I retired from hockey. So I think being able to bring in like an instant network, especially of high end people with whatever field you want to go in. And it's almost like I got at Wasserman a mentorship from some of the best agents in hockey. How can we provide that for guys for whatever business they want to go into? And I think that that only accelerates their learning curve and definitely helps them probably avoid a few mistakes that others would have made in the past.
For sure. Well, Drew, this has been great. Thank you so much for the time. We'll wrap up with one final question. It's our cool bet question. If you go to puckpedia.com/coolbet, you can get in on the action today. Stay cool, bet responsibly. Puckpedia.com/coolbet. It's a question we ask all our guests who have been on the show for the first time. It's just a simple question. It's just, what advice do you have for people who are listening who want to break into the hockey industry, especially for you, I guess less so, not all these people listening have the athletic ability to play in the NHL, but as someone who maybe wants to get into, like you mentioned, on that team side, that agency side, like what advice would you have kind of throughout all your wisdom and just everything you've kind of been through in your career?
I would just say just start knocking on doors. I mean, hockey's an industry that has been, like we talked about earlier, has been run by the same people, but there's always someone looking for help for something. So if you want to be an agent, I would call the 5 best agents in hockey and ask if there's anything you can do for them. And it might have to be working for free for a couple of months, whether it's for a team, it could be the same thing. But I think just getting your foot in the door, and you see some guys who have really moved their way up, whether it's from team services who are now GMs, whether it's guys who started in the analytics departments who are now GMs. And I feel like once you get your foot in the door, then it's like how well you do depends on how successful you are and ultimately the value that you bring to that organization. But I think that I would just be trying everything I can to get my foot in the door because there's always someone who needs some help doing something. So if you can put your ego aside and just break through that door, I think you can have a lot of success.
Awesome. I totally agree. And it's refreshing to hear that from like someone who's kind of been on the other side of it, that's kind of what you have to do. Cause that seems to be the resounding answer. But Drew, this is great. Thank you so much for the time. If you guys want to go to drewshore.com to get all of the stuff Drew's working on, he's got his Bet in the Limit podcast. And like we mentioned, Amalfi, and then obviously the agency side of things. Drew's crushing it and we really appreciate the time. Is there anything else you want to pump or does that kind of cover it?
That's great. Appreciate what you're doing. Love your show and thanks for having me on.
PuckPedia.